What if a single factory could hold the power to alter the destiny of an entire nation? In the small community of Kamsila in Basamayam, that question has suddenly become real. A wealthy businesswoman, one of the country's most prominent billionaires, has introduced Africa's largest rice processing plant, an enormous facility capable of refining 400 tons of rice every single day. Even President Ibrahim Traoré, who has consistently spoken as the loudest advocate for food independence, was left astonished by the sudden unveiling. Could this bold creation finally put an end to Burkina Faso's long dependence on imported rice and spark a new chapter of self-reliance? The nation now waits to see the answer. The announcement did not emerge from the president's office or through a grand national ceremony. Instead, it came quietly from the countryside in the region of Kdogo. There, away from the capital's political stage, something was revealed that has now captured the imagination of millions. For years, the billionaire had been known as a symbol of wealth, admired but never really seen as a figure shaping politics or policy. That perception changed overnight. She presented a project that has already been labeled as a national game changer, a rice processing factory of unprecedented magnitude, the largest anywhere on the continent. Observers were stunned not just by its existence but by its sheer scale. Capable of processing hundreds of tons of rice each day, the facility doesn't merely add another industrial site to Burkina Faso's landscape, it reshapes it entirely. For decades, the nation has been forced to rely heavily on imports, spending millions each year to bring in rice from Asia to feed its citizens. Ships loaded with rice bags would dock, their contents eventually finding their way to family tables across the country. But in Basamayam now stands a machine of industry so large that it threatens to flip that dependence upside down. What has made the news even more striking is the way it blindsided the political leadership. President Ibrahim Traoré, since coming to power, has placed agriculture and food sovereignty at the very center of his vision. He has urged his people to believe in their own ability to sustain themselves, insisting that Burkina Faso's soil is capable of feeding Burkina Faso's people. Yet insiders suggest even he was surprised by the sheer scale of what this one investor had managed to accomplish without fanfare. Ministers who rushed to visit the plant shortly after its announcement reportedly spoke of it as a revolution hidden in plain sight. They admitted that while the government had offered some support during the development, no one had anticipated the final result would be this bold, this far-reaching. The reaction among everyday people was immediate. News traveled swiftly through radio shows, through social media posts, and through conversations whispered in crowded markets. In Ouagadougou, young street vendors expressed amazement at the possibility that their country might soon be exporting rice rather than importing it. In Bobo Dioulasso, farmers gathered to hear local leaders explain how this plant could transform their crops into a steady and reliable income. In smaller towns like Kaya and Kdogo, women's associations discussed with excitement what kinds of jobs and opportunities this factory might bring directly into their communities. The billionaire herself has not yet delivered a long public speech. However, her team has made it clear that this venture is not simply about profits. They have emphasized that the project is about something larger, about sovereignty itself. Under President Traoré's leadership, the word sovereignty has taken on deep symbolic meaning, tied not just to politics but to identity. And in a region where reliance on foreign goods has often translated into reliance on foreign powers, the arrival of this industrial giant represents something much deeper. It is a declaration that Burkina Faso can take its future into its own hands. Economically, the impact of this development is already reverberating far beyond the borders of Kdogo. Investors across West Africa are beginning to ask how a landlocked nation with limited infrastructure could manage to host such a massive facility. Diplomats are quietly admitting that Burkina Faso has pulled off an unexpected triumph in its quest for economic independence. And inside the country, the conversation has shifted into a rallying cry. If one private citizen can change so much, what could happen if the entire population united under the same vision? The breakthrough also carries cultural weight. Food in Africa has never been just food. It is tied to identity, to pride, to dignity. For a country often portrayed internationally as struggling or fragile, the fact that Burkina Faso now possesses the largest rice facility on the continent alters perception both at home and abroad. Suddenly, the Sahel is not just a story of drought and insecurity. It is also a story of creativity, of progress, and of unexpected achievement. But behind all the headlines and political excitement lies the practical question everyone is now asking: what makes this facility so different? After all, rice mills exist in many parts of Africa, yet none of them have generated this level of attention or been hailed as revolutionary. The answer is found not in the building's size alone, but in the technology inside it. Step beyond the gates of the Kdogo rice plant and the reason for the nationwide shock becomes obvious. This is not just a warehouse full of machines. It is a highly organized system, an ecosystem of precision, designed to transform raw harvests into polished market-ready rice that can compete with the very best imports from Asia. The process is seamless. Trucks carrying freshly harvested rice arrive at the intake bays, where the grain is immediately cleaned of stones, dust, and impurities that have long plagued local harvests. From there, conveyor belts move the rice to high-capacity washing, units that scrub away husks and dirt. This step not only raises hygiene standards but also guarantees the kind of consistency that local rice often lacked when compared with imported varieties. Once washed, the grains travel into polishing machines that give them a gleaming finish, removing rough textures that previously marked them as low-grade in both local and international markets. But perhaps the most impressive aspect lies within the milling halls. Automated systems separate broken grains from intact kernels with incredible accuracy. What once would have been dismissed as waste, the broken rice, is now packaged separately for specific markets where demand for it exists. Nothing goes to waste. The intact grains are carefully sorted by size and weight, prepared to be branded as premium Burkina Faso rice. The final stage is packaging, and here the transformation becomes visible. The plant has adopted world-class branding methods, producing sealed bags that meet international retail standards. Instead of loosely tied sacks or faded ink stamps, rice now leaves Kdogo in sleek printed packaging that carries a Burkina Faso identity, one that signals not only quality, but pride. This is no longer just rice. It is a product with dignity, designed to stand confidently on supermarket shelves from Ouagadougou to regional export centers. And this is just the beginning of what makes the facility extraordinary. The Kdogo facility is not simply about scale. It is also about efficiency and resilience. Its energy-saving systems reduce power consumption, while massive airtight silos preserve the rice against spoilage, extending its shelf life and allowing for year-round distribution. This addresses one of the greatest challenges that has haunted African agriculture for generations: post-harvest losses. Across the continent, countless tons of grain rot before ever reaching families because of poor storage and unreliable infrastructure. At Kdogo, that pattern is broken. Temperature-controlled silos and non-stop processing mean that virtually every harvest finds its way to the market. For the first time, farmers can have confidence that what they plant in their fields will feed families, not spoil in warehouses. Flexibility is another of the plant's revolutionary strengths. Unlike traditional rigid factories, this one was engineered to adapt to shifting circumstances. If domestic demand rises sharply during a crisis such as drought or global supply shocks, production can pivot toward the local market. In years of bawad, surplus output can be scaled up for export. In a world where rice prices spike unpredictably, this kind of flexibility functions both as a shield and a sword. But the plant is more than machinery. It is also a classroom. The billionaire behind. The investment insisted that local engineers and technicians be involved in both construction and operations. Rather than relying solely on foreign expertise, the project created workshops to train young Burkinabe in logistics, packaging, machine maintenance, and quality control. In a country where opportunities for technical education are scarce, the IOU facility doubles as a training ground, producing skilled workers alongside processed rice. Step back, and what emerges in Kdogo is not just industrial equipment, but a vision of sovereignty made real. The factory proves that Burkina Faso can meet global standards, not by copying others, but by innovating based on its own needs. The effects, however, stretch far beyond conveyor belts and steel walls. They touch lives in villages, in households, in schools. For decades, farmers in Burkina Faso have lived under a cloud of uncertainty. They sowed their fields in hope but often harvested only disappointment. Crops spoiled, prices were undercut by imports, or middlemen purchased at unfairly low rates. The arrival of the continent's largest rice plant has changed the equation almost overnight. For the first time, many farmers now enjoy something priceless: stability. Contracts signed with local cooperatives guarantee that rice from surrounding regions is purchased directly by the plant, processed, packaged, and sold into the market. This certainty transforms farming from a gamble into a career. A farmer can now plan beyond a single season. He can decide how much land to cultivate, how many workers to hire, and even how much credit to borrow for seeds and fertilizer. Farming begins to look less like survival and more like a sustainable livelihood. The transformation is even more profound for women, who make up a silent majority of Burkina Faso's agricultural workforce. Traditionally, women have been trapped in the lowest rungs of farming, bending over fields without access to financing, secure land ownership, or reliable markets. Their labor, though essential, often disappeared into anonymous sacks of rice sold cheaply to middlemen. That has begun to change. The billionaire's investment has elevated women's cooperatives into formal partners in the supply chain. Their harvests no longer vanish into obscurity. Instead, they re-emerge from Kdogo in sleek packaging stamped with international-grade branding, a proud symbol of their labor and skill. Beyond the fields, women are also stepping into salaried positions inside the plant itself. Jobs in logistics, quality control, packaging, and administration are increasingly being filled by women from nearby towns. For many, it is their first time holding stable employment with regular pay and benefits. In a society where economic power has long been unequal, the Kdogo project is quietly shifting gender dynamics, proving that sovereignty is not only national, but also deeply personal. The country's youth are equally finding new horizons. For years, unemployment and lack of opportunity drove thousands of young Burkinabe to seek work abroad. Now, the plant is creating both direct and indirect jobs. Young people are being trained as machine operators, drivers, warehouse managers, and maintenance technicians. Secondary industries are also blooming. Transport companies carrying rice to markets, suppliers providing uniforms and equipment, and entrepreneurs opening restaurants and small businesses near the bustling industrial hub. Even more important than the jobs is the cultural shift. Farming, long seen as grueling and unrewarding, is regaining its dignity. The guarantee of a steady income changes how young people view agriculture. Instead of fleeing rural life, many are rethinking it, recognizing farming as a possible entry point into a modern economy. For a generation raised under instability, the plant is more than just a workplace. It has become a living symbol that progress is possible within their own homeland. The ripple effects are already visible. Schools in Kdogo report higher attendance, as parents now have the means to pay fees consistently. Local markets are buzzing with new activity as farmers spend more freely, and families invest in improved housing. Clinics are noticing better nutrition as households can afford more varied diets. What began as an industrial project is weaving itself into the social fabric of Burkina Faso, bringing dignity and hope to communities that had been overlooked for far too long. Yet these transformations extend beyond economics and into politics. By uplifting farmers, women, and youth, the Kdogo plant strengthens the foundation of President Ibrahim Traoré's vision. From the beginning of his rule, he has argued that sovereignty must be rooted in the people's ability to provide for themselves. His critics often dismissed these ideas as lofty rhetoric. But the rice plant stands as physical evidence that the vision is attainable. Domestically, the symbolism is powerful. Traoré has long claimed that sovereignty is not an abstract idea but a reality that should be lived by ordinary citizens. Now, thanks to a privately funded project that aligns perfectly with his message, those words appear to be materializing in everyday life. For his supporters, it is as though his speeches have taken physical form in bricks and machinery. Even though the government did not create the facility, it has quickly become tied to his broader project for national renewal. This alignment carries clear political rewards. Opposition voices who accused the government of clinging to slogans rather than real solutions now face undeniable proof that progress is being made. For Traoré's allies, the story is even stronger. They see a leader whose vision has inspired private citizens to invest in the nation's future at an unprecedented scale. In a country where politics often feels distant from people's daily struggles, this plant bridges that divide, showing how sovereignty can directly transform livelihoods. Regionally, the implications are just as significant. The Sahel is a region marked by turbulence, with Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger challenging pressure from ECOWAS and attempting to chart a new course through the Alliance of Sahel States, AES. In such a climate, every step toward self-reliance carries political weight. The Kdogo project proves that Burkina Faso can advance development without relying on Western aid packages or loans tied to external conditions. This bolsters Traoré's argument that African nations are capable of forging their own destiny, free from the dictates of former colonial powers. Internationally, the story complicates long-standing narratives. Many in Western capitals have portrayed Burkina Faso as a nation sliding into isolation under military rule. Yet the Kdogo plant presents a very different picture, a country moving towards stability and progress through homegrown solutions. For allies such as Russia and China, it reinforces the idea that Africa's sovereignty and industrial growth can be achieved without Western oversight. Diplomats in Ouagadougou are already recalibrating their assessments, realizing that Burkina Faso is no longer satisfied to be a passive recipient of foreign aid, but is actively building internal strength. And then, there is the remarkable fact that the driving force behind this transformative project is a woman. In a political landscape often dominated by men, the presence of a female billionaire reshapes the conversation about power and development. For President Traoré, who has consistently emphasized youth and inclusivity in his rhetoric, this becomes yet another proof point. Sovereignty is not confined to government offices or military barracks. It is being pushed forward by Burkinabe citizens of every background. Still, this unexpected gift comes with challenges. The government must carefully integrate the Kdogo plant into its wider food strategy without appearing to simply ride on the coattails of private wealth. Traoré cannot allow the achievement to seem disconnected from national policy, but at the same time, He must avoid sending the message that sovereignty can be outsourced to billionaires. Striking this balance will require careful framing. The plant must be celebrated not as a lone accomplishment, but as part of a larger national movement. Yet even with these complexities, the momentum is undeniable. With the opening of a single facility, the vision of sovereignty has gained something powerful: credibility. Unlike a speech or a policy document, the Kdogo plant is a living, breathing entity. It cannot be erased by critics. The question is not hypothetical. Africa remains the world's largest importer of rice despite having vast amounts of fertile land. Every year, countries like Nigeria, Senegal, Côte d'Ivoire, and Ghana spend billions of dollars purchasing rice from Asia. This constant drain on foreign reserves leaves their economies vulnerable, exposes them to global price shocks, and keeps them locked in cycles of dependency. The result is a paradox. Nations with the capacity to feed themselves are held hostage by decisions made thousands of miles away in Bangkok or New Delhi. The Kdogo plant disrupts this pattern. It is not just about Burkina Faso. It represents an idea with continental implications. The message is clear: industrial sovereignty is possible. Africa does not need to remain a passive consumer of the world's surplus. By building infrastructure of scale and sophistication, it can meet its own needs and even compete in international markets. What makes this achievement so powerful is its symbolism. For decades, skeptics argued that African rice could never compete with Asian imports because of quality and branding issues. Kdogo challenges that excuse head-on. By meeting international standards in packaging, hygiene, and consistency, it has proven that local production can reach global benchmarks. This precedent is invaluable for governments trying to persuade their citizens that homegrown development is achievable without endless borrowing from international lenders. It is also a cultural statement. In a continent where wealthy elites often funnel their fortunes abroad into luxury properties, foreign banks, or overseas businesses, this project sends a different message. Here is a Burkina Faso woman who chose to invest her resources in her homeland, not in Paris or Dubai. She has chosen to build rather than to buy, and that choice elevates her as a symbol of national pride. It shows that prestige can be rooted in creating something for one's own people, rather than consuming the achievements of others. The potential for regional cooperation is also significant. West Africa has spoken about food sovereignty for decades, but actual progress has often been slowed by fragmented policies and lack of shared infrastructure. With a facility of this scale in Burkina Faso, a new possibility emerges. Neighboring states struggling with their own food shortages could source rice from Kdogo instead of from Asia, keeping wealth circulating within the region. Over time, this model could inspire similar investments across the continent: a groundnut facility in Senegal, a cocoa processing giant in Côte d'Ivoire, or a maize hub in Tanzania. Each country could contribute to a collective push toward continental independence. But beyond economics, there is also a psychological revolution at play. Too often, Africa's narrative has been defined by what it lacks: lack of infrastructure, lack of industry, lack of opportunity. Kdogo interrupts that story. It reframes the conversation by offering an African example of success that stands without foreign aid or external control. There are no donor logos on its gates. No foreign agencies dictate its operations. It is financed by Africans, built for Africans, serving African needs. That shift in perception may be just as important as the tons of rice it produces each day. Still, the road ahead is not without challenges. Inspiration alone will not dismantle entrenched dependency. For the Kdogo model to spread, governments must show political courage. They must be willing to support local production, even if it disrupts established trade relations that favor imports. African investors must also take responsibility, channeling their wealth into long-term industries rather than seeking quick profits abroad. And citizens themselves must embrace local products with pride, giving them the same respect often reserved for imported goods. If these conditions align, the impact could be transformative. Africa could redirect billions of dollars once spent on imports into building schools, hospitals, roads, and industries. It could begin to align its immense natural resources with the needs of its own people rather than the demands of external markets. Most importantly, it could finally break the cycle of dependency that has for so long undermined its sovereignty. For Burkina Faso, Kdogo has already answered the question of whether one facility can change the destiny of a nation. The plant has shown that it is possible to leap from reliance to self-sufficiency in a single bold step. But for Africa, the bigger question remains, will Kdogo remain an isolated triumph, or will it become a spark that lights a continental revolution? In food sovereignty, the potential is staggering. If a country like Burkina Faso, often portrayed as fragile, landlocked, and struggling, can host Africa's largest rice processing plant, then what could be achieved in larger, wealthier nations with greater resources? If one woman's decision to invest locally can alter the trajectory of an entire country, then what might happen if dozens of Africa's billionaires followed the same path? The plant at Kdogo is more than an industrial project. It is a mirror, reflecting back to Africa what is possible when vision, courage, and commitment are combined. It dares other nations to imagine themselves differently, not as dependents, but as creators of their own future. For now, Burkina Faso stands at the center of that conversation, holding up an example for the continent and the world. Whether others choose to follow remains to be seen. But one truth is already undeniable. The story of Africa's food sovereignty can no longer be told without mentioning Kdogo. And so, as the final grain is polished, packaged, and sent into the market each day, a quiet but powerful message is carried with it. Africa has the ability to feed itself. The only question is, will it choose to? If you've followed this journey and want to keep exploring powerful stories about Africa's transformation, culture, history, and untold achievements, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. There are many more stories waiting to be shared, and you won't want to miss them.